Hey, EM. Hey, Graham, or actually GM and EM. Thank you so much, both of you, for making yourselves available. EM, you are a former Green Beret Special Ops superstar, historian, author, fabulous writer. I'll have your links in the description below. Graham, you are a common law lawyer, an expert par excellence, head of the English Constitution Party and the English Constitution Society. I should have your links in the description below. And I thought we could start with, what to do? What to do? What can we do as this tyrannical government is robbing us of our rights? You know,
now we're seeking to rob you of your lives by sending you to the trenches of Ukraine.
Yes, that as well. That as well. You can really see that happening. Hands up if you're going to go and fight for starmer.
But it's worse than that. They're lowering the age to vote to 16, and the reason for that is once you are old enough to vote at 16, you're old enough to go to the front line. Why? Because Parliament votes for war. And that means if they make a politician eligible for Parliament at 16, 16-year-olds can be sent to the front line.
Correct. And they won't give you an option. I wrote about this yesterday. They will conscript. They've been practicing all of this in Ukraine, doing forced conscription for the last 2 years.
Exactly.
Using the Azov battalion.
Yeah.
Well, it's bigger than a battalion.
I think it was something like 2.5 million people that have got there. For some reason, my screen.
It's about 2 million dead now, and right now the battles are 30-1 in favor of the Russians.
Yeah, well, there's just no way the rest of Europe or NATO is going to prevail against Russia. No way, no way, no.
Well, that's not the intent. They don't want to prevail. They need to kill off the native sons, and it's not like they haven't been openly stating it. When they say population decline, they mean us. Why? Because we own the world. Well, we own the assets of, they want to take the largest pool of wealth ever accumulated, which is the boomers' wealth, which is supposed to get passed down to us. Well, it can't pass down to us if we're gone.
Right. Now, a slight little interruption here. NoTaxForWar.com. I did an interview with Chris Coverdale on Neil Oliver's show, which has had really, really great reviews, but I recommend people go and watch that. I'll link to that in the comments and in the description. NoTaxForWar.com, how you can legally, peacefully, lawfully withhold your tax, as I've done for 2 years now, with some capital gains tax as a protest against war. Graham, anything you want to say about what Ian said? And actually, it's like, what can we do about it?
Well, so again, there are so many. I watched a great interview with Carl Benjamin and Rupert Lowe. And people have been sending me that interview. And during that, Carl Benjamin said on a number of occasions that we're just sort of trying to follow the rights of the United States of America. And if I had been in that conversation, I would have said, no. You need to understand that those rights in the United States of America, and why the United Independent States of America is the greatest nation on earth, is because it followed in the footsteps of England, not the British, the English, and English constitution and common law rights. There is a special relationship, and who we need to look to is the United States. They are taking back America constitutionally. For some people, it may be a bit slower than they actually want, but I do think things are going to happen. So what to do about it? You've referenced not paying tax a number of times. I'm fully for not paying tax. It's one of the oldest ways in which the people could vent their venom at the state. But you must tell the people. It's a bit like I won't say it because I don't know what platform this is going out on, but if you're going to make any form of medical intervention, you must inform that person of all of the risks. And withholding tax is fantastic, in particular council tax, but you must inform the audience of the risk. And that is that if you own your own property, they will come after you illegally. I haven't got a problem with saying to people that the method of enactment of the laws that allowed it is unlawful under the English Constitution. But you must tell people if you own your own property and you owe more than £1,000, and I think it's £1,001, the local authority can then apply to the county court to put a lien on or force you to sell your property to pay them. And then what they will do is sell your house forcibly, and they will give you the balance. And they don't care what price they get for the property. So you must tell people the truth. There's another group of people that are renters that have no association with the asset. And even as long as you don't have assets that they can come after, there is absolutely nothing they can do. And you literally just stop paying council tax. That is a fantastic way forward. But you must be truthful with people. What I don't do is not tell people these are the potential pitfalls. And you will have bailiffs banging on your door. One rule, or the main rule with the bailiff, is it's the same as vampires. Do not open the door and keep your windows locked. Vampires can only enter your premises, right, if you invite them in. If you open the door, bailiffs will gain entry to your property. As soon as you open the door, they'll put the foot in the door. Whether they're aggressive, they can be illegal in what they do. But when they come in and they mark your property, so they say TV, and they put a number 1, and they write in their manifesto, number 1, TV, and they go through your property with all your assets. When they walk out of your front door, and they tell you, we're going to be back in a week or 2 weeks, if you haven't paid this bill, you take all of those items that we've listed. Once they've done that, they then do have the authority to break into your property. How do you stop that? Don't answer the door to them at all.
Sure.
I have an alternative. Stake them through the heart like a vampire.
Yeah. That is fine, but
we don't have the Second Amendment, unfortunately. Yeah, right?
We haven't got the Second Amendment.
Yeah,
well, I don't know if you need it for a hammer and a stake, right?
I just want to say about the council tax. So one is on Monday, the 22nd of December from 7 p.m. There is a Q&A section where people can come along. You need to register on the website notaxforwar.com, and then you get sent an email. You can go along. There's questions and answers. And I did this with regards to some capital gains tax with HMRC, and it's 2 years now. They just keep asking me, can you send us the money? And I said, look, I've already paid through trust, and what you're asking me to do is to commit a criminal offense. Stop asking me to do that. And I quoted the statutes in the International Criminal Court Act and the Terrorism Act to make it really clear, if I have reasonable cause to believe that some of this money is going to be used for genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, or acts of terrorism as defined by those statutes, I'm committing a criminal offense. And so are you by asking me. So there's a little bit more to it, but I do take what you're saying, Graham. It's important, don't take any more risk than you're willing to. But if enough people do this and they just push it along the wire, it just becomes so expensive and cumbersome to administer.
I agree with you entirely, and it's one of them things that everyone has to agree on the strategy going forward. And this is where herding cats comes in. People need to agree on the strategy and move forward on that. As long as I have no objection to people saying I'm not paying council tax, as long as they tell people the truth and they tell people that this will happen once you start that process. This is what's going to happen to you. Without getting into detail, I haven't paid council tax for 15 years, right? But I don't promote that to other people because I am different in the way that I deal with bailiffs, that I deal with these people coming at me, and I can do that. What I can't do is act as a representative to thousands of people that say, oh, Graham Moore says this, and that's what I'm doing, and then get thousands of emails where, they've done everything wrong, they've let them into their premises, they're having the cars taken away and all sorts, and everyone is pointing at me. That's why I don't promote it.
So, this is perhaps a show all on its own. We have the same problem here in the United States. Right, in any law-based society or system, the regime does all straight up illegal things.
Yeah.
Constantly, always. Here's prosecutors, district attorneys, right? Using the marshals, we have bailiffs in some areas, constables in others, etc. And they are, and in casework, even social workers, right? They're constantly doing ludicrously illegal things. But the people don't know so it's one thing to know the law. It's a fundamentally different thing to know how the members of the regime themselves are going around the law or themselves conducting themselves in ways that are not in accordance with the law. And that knowledge is vastly more important, actually, than people really knowing the law itself, because knowing the law, well, it's the law. It's there. It's in the books. And folks like Rich, you're talking about, and Graham, as you've spoken of, and you yourself know, you can share that knowledge. But how do you deal with the ways in which those who are supposed to be upholding the law are themselves breaking it?
Yeah.
And that's a mindset, right? A behavioral pattern. And by the way, they're hired and selected for this behavior.
Yeah,
right?
no,
These types are specifically
100%. People
right?
don't. So the psychometric testing that you've just said, they are actually looking for this type of people to carry out state crimes.
Correct, because it's a great revenue stream, but more what it does is it keeps a constant state of unease, disquiet, anger, wrath. When people are in that state and condition, it's very hard for them to organize. It's very hard for them to coordinate. It's very hard for them to pause a moment, take a step back, and look at the actual legal system and structure and how it can be used to their advantage. Right? So, I don't hear many conversations, even here in the United States, where it's rampant. I mean, this illegality by law enforcement and the judiciary and their adjuncts it's out of control everywhere. Asset forfeitures, right? Eminent domain stuff. I mean, just on and on and on. It's vast fortune. I mean, they're bringing in, I don't remember what the last numbers were, but it was almost $1 trillion a year illegally.
So in England, it used to be known, and this is quite a famous quote that I could bring up. It was actually brought up in Hansard, I believe, when an MP brought this up. This is over 100 years ago. And the MP stood up and said, every Englishman is a common lawyer. Every Englishman knows his rights. Every Englishman knows how to stand in a court of law and defend himself without a barrister, without a lawyer. Yes. And that's what you've got to go back to. They've removed it from the curriculum for a particular purpose because the communists do not want everyone to know what their rights are. And indeed, they don't want you to know that you have a constitution, which you most definitely do.
I want to quibble one little point, not quibble the point, but I want to make a refinement to the point, right? We're not fighting communists at this point. We're fighting the Fourth Reich. We're fighting fascists, National Socialists. And I'm not going to say the Nazis because that was just one group, right? National Socialists. We're fighting fascism, Benito Mussolini's type of fascism. That's the governments. They use the communist folks as a smokescreen, a front to do the insane things, the stupid things. But the reason I say this is because the communists are stupid. The fascists are not. And the fascists are very much about the system and the regime because that's where their whole power is based. Right? They wanted, go ahead.
Let me just say, I don't disagree with what you've just said there. In my law book, to my left, it tells you that fascists and communists must be purged from all positions of state security, and they say that in England's common law, so the Halsby's Laws of England, it actually states that at paragraph 1310. Why do I say that? Because the United States of America has the same ethos as the English, and that is we do not tolerate authoritarian governance, whether it is national socialists or global socialists. They are the same group of people. One is slightly more advanced, but they are both on the extreme left.
Correct.
Neither of them are on the right. The Nazis were never on the right of politics.
Correct. The right of left.
Left.
Yeah, the right of left.
Exactly.
That's why I wrote the book, The Eternal War. I just changed the language, the wording, the labels, because all the labels have been corrupted so much. I call them resentfuls. Yeah. These are the resentfuls, and they operate according to 13 doctrinal lines, 13 lines of effort, right? And one of those doctrinal lines is systems. They always rise up within systems, institutions, and systems.
Bureaucracy.
That
is how they take control. And then from bureaucracy, again, if you read a book from Lord Hewitt, which was The Modern Despotism in 1929, he was the Lord Chief Justice. And he explained exactly what's going on today then. His book caused a furore because what he said is you are subverting the English constitution by creating non-government organisations, quangos, and separate lawmakers and lawmakers. And in those laws, you are placing the phrases, this cannot be appealed, this cannot be adjudicated outside of this department, etc. That is unlawful, right? And all of that was presented to the people as a book by the Lord Chief Justice, and exactly what he was describing in 1929 is happening now. 1929 was just before the Nazis started to take control, and then there was a process of control. Part of that process was what's known as enabling acts, and that meant that anything they did after those enabling acts was not illegal. It was perfectly legal. The judges then implemented the law as the Nazis enacted it. And that is what's being created now under the British system. The British Parliament is no longer a parliament. It is a Politburo.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Graham, just on that, you did a really great clip, 9-minute video on your Rumble channel about saying that Parliament is not sovereign. And you referenced a 1947, I think it was 1947 Act that in the footnotes, you said, they in the Bill of Rights, there's this, in the original text of the Bill of Rights, 1688 Bill of Rights, there's a passage which says that these rights cannot be derogated, i.e. they cannot be diminished in any way or taken away. And in this footnote of this statute, that passage was removed.
So they top and tailed the passage, and the way that they did, they took the top part of the passage away, the bottom part of the passage, they left the middle bit, but the top and bottom part was the bit that told everyone Parliament is not sovereign. The Constitution is sovereign, and the rule of law is sovereign, right? So we're part of that because we have access via our elected representatives to the Commons, and the Commons is us represented in that Parliament. And what they did by top and tailing chapter 2 of, and it's worse because in 1867 they absolutely removed chapter 3. Again, even if you read ODYSEE says there's certain phrases in any enactment of constitutional law, if it contains a phrase like in perpetuity, if it contains a phrase like forever or in this realm for all time to come, that means what it says. It cannot. And bearing in mind, the English Bill of Rights come from a convention parliament. It is not an ordinary parliament. It was a revolutionary parliament, right? No difference to what happened in the War of Independence. They then got together, they created the Constitution, they codified it from the English Constitution, and that was the enforcement going forward. What the British did just after the Second World War in 1947 is they, by stealth, they didn't tell people. It wasn't on the front of the bill that was being passed. It was in the footnotes, and then there was a tiny piece in there. It was so cryptic that most people reading it wouldn't understand, except I read it and said that is unlawful. The way it's been written, the way it's been hidden from the people is unlawful because it removes our access to Parliament, and it tells Parliament you are not sovereign.
Right. Now, which act was that?
It was called I've got a whole pamphlet on it. It's called a general act. And buried in that general act was this reference to William and Mary. But if you look up the Bill of Rights and then you click on the part, chapter 2, chapter 3 is completely missing. If you click on that part, it tells you where to go and find that. You click on it, and then it shows you it. But in the document that I've done, and I went through in that video, I showed it. That's not, it's been described as constitutional vandalism. It's actually subversion or treason. That is what happened. And it was because, just to make sure everyone's clear on this, we lost the Second World War. And we lost to the Soviet Union, who then infiltrated at every level on the other side. One of the people that noted this was General Patton. He actually said, he said in 50 or 70 years' time, we're going to realize we fought on the wrong side. That was not because he was a Nazi. He understood that there were two evils. One was the Nazi regime, or National Socialists, and the other was global socialists. And what he was saying is the global socialists are now going to attack the United States of America and everyone external to Europe. And that's exactly what's going on now today.
Okay. Yeah. So, Graham, I imagine if people look at the original text of the Bill of Rights in the British Library near King's Cross Station, they would see that chapter 2 and chapter 3 are still in there.
Absolutely. The original, in fact, if you see the original enacted, which is on 10 parchment papers, parchment, meaning, and it's still an act. It's not actually known as it's still a bill. It's not known as everyone else's as a statute. They can read the whole thing. Yeah, but again, people must understand that is a subversion of our constitution by people that knew that they was subverting, or in other words, committing treason, and it was completely ultra-vires.
Yep, because they're not sovereign. And Ian, you said earlier that when Graham said it was the Soviets that won the Second World War, you said no, you disagree. Say more.
I think the National Socialists won the war. And we're seeing them everywhere. And then look at all of the enactments that happened in the United States, the United Kingdom, particularly in 1947, seems to be a whole lot of stuff. And what was Operation Paperclip and Gladio and Sunrise? And, there's 200 named operations to bring National Socialists directly into our governments at the highest levels and into our industry, finance, everything. And where'd the equivalent of roughly $10 trillion that was stolen by the National Socialists from Europe go? And how big is that money now?
Wow. Would it be a fair guess to say it went to the City of London?
Well, there in Wall Street,
right,
and elsewhere, right? But what did that do? It seeded the spider's web.
Yeah.
Right. The global offshore banking systems, which were created out of. But there's equivalents in Malaysia, the Labuan, right? The Malaysian version of offshore, Guernsey, Jersey, etc. So I don't believe, and more we're seeing, and now we're seeing straight up Nazi stuff popping up in social media, etc., being allowed. I don't believe the Soviets won World War II. I believe the National Socialists won World War II at the expense of 7 million German men and 30 million Russians.
And they went underground.
Well, they were brought right in.
Right, into these power structures in the United States, in the UK,
correct,
in the European Union,
correct,
the Fourth Reich.
Look at who's MI6 lead right now? What's her ethnicity?
Yeah, no, I agree. I can't disagree with that at all. I absolutely agree. Yeah, she is Ukrainian. Grandfather was an SS, I believe, officer. And whilst they can put a slant on it that he wasn't actually a Nazi SS officer, they were aligned to the Nazis and committed lots of atrocities.
Well, and let's look at let's look at Gehlen organization, Major General Gehlen. He was the National Socialist intelligence commander for the Eastern Front. Massive atrocities. He was brought directly into work, for MI6 and the CIA until the early 1950s, and then he and Gehlen organization, his private military, his contractors, his wet works, became German intelligence. So the 2-star National Socialist, right, officer is the one who was, when they stood up German intelligence in 1952, I think it was 51, 52 or whatever, becomes the head of German intelligence. Therefore, for all intents and purposes, the head of European intelligence. So how do, people really need to go read Benito Mussolini's 1932 speech on fascism, right? Because fascism, unlike communism, Marxism, is all about the state. And it's all about, the rule of law. And very much to what you said, Graham, I've written on this as well. Everything the Nazis did, the National Socialists did, was in accordance with the laws as changed through the proper methods and means of changing the laws. Everything that the Soviets did was in accordance with Soviet law. At some point, we have to ask ourselves, what validity is the law, right? We're looking at these magic of words. So they did the right articulation of the will of the people in 1688. And then some people come along a couple hundred years later or 300 years later and just through the magic of words, remove that.
So
now, go ahead.
I agree with everything you're saying. And people, the thing that I would emphasize, this is my opinion, right? It matters not if you are an Englishman, an English constitutionist, a common law rights, God's law, if you want to call it that, right? It matters not whether they are national socialists or global socialists. So it matters not whether they're communists or fascist, they are still forbidden from our types of nation, right? But just getting back, because again, it's come up about the English Bill of Rights, and remember the Scots had the claim of right.
Yeah.
But your people are currently looking at what they're doing, so they're now banning or postponing or eliminating elections in England. They're talking about taking them out, right? That is fundamentally unconstitutional. There is no representation, no taxation without representation. They're spending money on our behalf. They're taking taxes off us, and then they're suspending local elections. The next element to this, and this is important because it's to do with the English Bill of Rights. William Penn and William Mead, I think it was, there was a particular verdict, and it was called the Bushell case in 1670. Why is it important? Because the jury held out these two religious guys, literally William Penn, who's buried just outside of Windsor in England. He and everyone in America should have understand who William Penn is.
Pennsylvania.
So people need to understand what happened. They were prosecuted for certain aspects that was decreed as a crime, and the jury and the head of the jury would not find them guilty, and basically said, we haven't come to a verdict yet. Then when they did come to a verdict, they said not guilty, and the judge in that case said, you need to go to prison with no food or water until you come back with a guilty verdict, right? This is in 1670. The people of England was up in arms. The whole of London were literally at boiling point of what they'd done to these jurors, let alone William Penn, right? But because we are a Christian nation. What happened then was that Bushell, who was the head of the jury, or the jury foreman, brought a case of habeas corpus to say to the High Court, you cannot keep us in prison and starve us to receive a guilty verdict. And the High Court come back and said that the jury's verdict is final, there is no appeal from the state, and it is unlawful to lock them up. It is their conscience, they're the ones, they are the peers of the defendant, and it's their decision. It is not the decision of a judge. That case, in essence, and previous cases, was then put into the English Bill of Rights. Remember that happened in 1670. In 1688, and bearing in mind we was very close to another civil war, which they was trying to avoid, they created this in a convention of parliament. So the king had run away. He abdicated. And by doing so, by deed, he threw the English Great Seal into the River Thames, he rode off, and he abandoned the nation, right? So the nation come together with a parliament without a king. It was known as a kingdom without a king, right? And the two sides, which was the Lords and the Commons, and it's really important to understand this, the Equity Court or the Chancery Court and the Common Law Courts come together and said, listen, we need to solve this. We need to solve it for the people, and this is what we're going to do. And that's how they wrote out from the Declaration, the English Bill of Rights. So that was created and cemented, written in stone in our. Yet now, today, they have announced not only are they going to abolish jury trials for any sentences up to 3 years, and now they've said in Parliament you cannot appeal. So if you get sentenced to 3 years imprisonment by a judge, there is no appeal, right? And yet all of this is being done by a Fabian cabinet, a Fabian government, a Fabian collectively run parliament to remove our rights. And it is quite right that the United States of America are looking and saying, what is happening to the motherland? Because the beating heart of the United States and its constitution and its common law is England, not Britain, right?
Yes.
And that's what people are looking at now, to say, how did it happen? How has the infiltration occurred? We need to go back to these points. And there's certain parts of history that we can show you through reverse engineering. So the Fabians and the Marxists do it in a slightly different way. And that way is by incremental, tiny little snippets, right? So for the jury side of this, and it's really important because stems back to that. They removed our grand juries in 1933, right? What else happened in 1933? Who else started to enact laws that were detrimental to the people and took us into World War II? The Nazis. Right?
Same people. So same people did it in England as the same people that did it in Germany.
So we've got the same thing yet again. They're clawing back our rights. They are making people ignorant of their rights. And if people only knew, all you've got to do is enforce the original English constitution. And all of this, when the people rise up, you will still have the rule of law. But then we say, no, no, no. The people, we have an agreement, we had a settlement, we had the Act of Settlement, and people need to know that's what you've got to go for. So it's important, in my opinion, that I don't care whether they're communists or Nazis, right? Both groups of ideologies are on the left. They are authoritarian, and they have got no place in England.
They're slavery systems.
Yeah.
They are straight up slavery systems. So if I might, every 400 years, we've had to fight this out. This has happened before. Now, this 400-year cycle that we're at, it doesn't necessarily need to go to blood. March on the crown. Occupy the crown for months, for a year if you have to. But occupy the crown, because you have a weapon that, if it comes together, if it's allowed to come together with the people, is extraordinarily powerful. All you have to do is do an Occupy Wall Street-like thing where you occupy the crown.
You petition the king, which is right? In the Bill of Rights, 1688 Bill of Rights. You have a right to petition the king.
And I've already proved to people that is still effective. When they arrested me for petitioning the king, right, or the Queen at the time, when it went to court, the police backed off, the CPS backed off. They offered no evidence because they knew that I could prosecute them because it was my right to petition the king.
Okay, so this is why they do everything they can to keep us hating the crown and keep us believing that the crown is the enemy and that the people who wear the crown and will wear the crown are bad people that are against the people, and they take them through humiliation rituals, and they own and control them because they own and control their security. March on the crown, and you will redress. You have the recourse to redress by marching on the crown. You don't have to go with pitchforks and torches. Just go occupy the palaces, the castles.
Well, so
and surround them. I don't mean occupy by going in and filling in, but occupy the ground
outside, having a rally outside, a peaceful local rally,
and sustain it, it in great numbers.
I can tell you now, when I did that in 2018, and bearing in mind, social media, mainstream media will not allow this type of protest to propagate for the reasons that EM are saying. It is very effective, right? Most people don't understand that there was 50 odd people with me outside Buckingham Palace, right? They didn't arrest everyone; they just arrested me. But the point I'm trying to make is it's effective. And the reason I know that is because every time I brought up that petition, not a protest, a petition, right? 1688 petition means making a demand, right? That's what the 1688 dictionary says. So when I did that, they took my YouTube channel down, my Facebook channel down, every avenue where I was expressing that method of us enforcing our authority as the people on the crown, right?
As the sovereign. The people are sovereign.
They took me down. And that is why I know it's effective. They think they're demoralizing me. They're not. What they're actually doing is proving that what I'm saying and what EM has just said is absolutely true. In our constitution, you can do it, but there is a process. It goes all the way back to 1384, I think it is, when it was observance of due process. It's only 2 or 3 lines, right? And the basis of it is there is a process. You must first petition Parliament. We've done that with Rupert Lowe. The next level is to petition the king en masse and go to the palace and stand there. Forget Parliament. You've already petitioned Parliament. They've ignored it. Now you take it to the crown. Could that work? 100%, but you have to do it in massive numbers.
You have to do it, and you have to sustain it. And there's 2 things that have to be in there. One, the crown needs to know that it has that you have its back. right? The crown needs to know that you are there to protect them as they go about, using their rights and privileges and prerogatives to restore the balance, to do what needs to be done legally, right, constitutionally for the English peoples. The crown needs to know. The crown hasn't known that it's had the people's back, or that the people have had the crown's back since the 1640s. And all this stuff has been happening because how much effort and time do we think, going all the way back, you can see it in the late 1500s and early 1600s, all of the effort put in to drive a wedge between people and crown. Ludicrous amounts of effort every year on all kinds of fronts about every single family member ever, right? All the way back before ultimately it led to the beheading of our king. So the crown needs, terribly sorry, go ahead.
No. So just to make sure we have had bad kings, and we have had kings gone pear-shaped.
Absolutely.
King Charles, for example, was educated by one of the tutors that educated Tony Blair, who is a Fabian. He has a distinct vision, and his vision is separate to what the people want in England, without a doubt. For example, he is now encouraging, from a recent speech I saw that he is preparing the British regime, people, etc., to go to war with Russia. He should not be in any way encouraging that, but he is.
Okay. I don't believe that that's actually true. I believe that what's happened is from the time he was a young man, he's known that if he steps out of line of the regime, they will kill him or his family, his children, grandchildren.
Okay, Ian, what's your clues for that? Or is it just a hunch? And I'm not challenging you, I'm curious.
No, it's a fair question. The one is just lifetime of watching and observing. Very much like Mothers on the Wall right there, right? So one is a lifetime of watching, two is a lifetime of understanding, and then personal special operations experience. The Praetorian threat is very dangerous, and it's very real. And it's in every high net worth family in the world, in the Western world. The English speaking world is the only one I really care about. But the Praetorian Guard is quite literally in everybody's home. Parliament controls and owns the security for the crown. The crown does not. And the crown has not owned its own security since Charles I. Right? That's one thing. And this is, anybody who's studied history to think that the Praetorian Guard that controlled the Roman Empire isn't doing the same to us is an idiot. Right? The second, the final piece to that is something that when Trump did his last formal, visit, not the one where he called the supplicants to the golf course up in Scotland, which was a master stroke. That was a hole in one right there. But this last trip where he came back, where Vance came over some days earlier and was meeting with, leaders of different things, and some very stern things are being said. Trump did not meet with government first. He went to Windsor. And if you look at the table of the people that were there, at the banquet, Trump stood up and twice made sure that he stated, this is a good king. And he meant it. There was no deception, his body posture, tone of voice, anything. And what he also articulated is that William will be a good king after.
Yeah, but he's also said in the past that Keir Starmer is a very intelligent and great leader.
Yeah, but when you see him say that, you can see the deception in him.
Right, but let me because you brought up President Trump, and I think this is really important. I personally believe there is something far bigger than most people have, and I've spoken about this for many years. Right, Taiwan is about to go back to China in that, so the whole of Taiwan is going back to them. Right,
already has. Yeah.
I believe that the United States of America will do a reverse takeover of the United Kingdom. And I believe that we will end up being, and what they'll say is, Europe, if you want to carry on with your wars and be communist, crack on, drop us out. We're not part of your system.
And you're not taking our parents and our homelands with you.
Right. So, and you'll have Russia, China, United States of America, and we will all get on with each other, and Europe they'll just let them carry on fighting and destroy each other.
I've written on this. It's called ARC. I'm not the only one communicating, but I've written on this: America, Russia, China. I also fundamentally agree that the reclamation of the United Kingdom and the English homelands, right, the English-speaking people's homelands, is already happening. I also believe that it was, again, things were set in motion in the 1960s that are coming to fruition here in America, that are also coming to a fruition there. Her Majesty was involved in all of this. And there's a reason she passed on, there's a reason she allowed Trump to walk in front of her. There's a reason for these signals. There's a reason why she didn't pass over Charles, as was His Majesty King Charles. I want to be respectful. There's a reason she didn't pass over him.
Okay, let me just say a couple of things, and then I'm going to respond to what you said. Yeah. So one, I recorded a video with Matt Errett on the history of the Fabian Society. People can go watch that on Crypto Rich Politics. I do recommend it because I learned loads about the Fabian Society. And then the other, you made a really important point, Ian, earlier, that how Hitler and Stalin, they did everything legally. They just changed the law so it was legal. And this government are doing that. Say with respect to the assisted dying bill, they're now talking about making it available to pregnant women. They'll be able to opt. Like what? But it's legal. So then that says something about the unjustness of the laws that are being passed, because they're not representing us. They're not acting in our best interests. They're lording it over us, and they're violating the Bill of Rights, the English Constitution.
They're mocking you. The problem is that we're not accepting the fundamental reality. They are mocking us by showing us how hollow our rule of law is without force behind it, without the people standing up with pitchforks, and you can go ahead and be disarmed. Our ancestors were, and they took pitchforks and torches. What they're doing is this is exactly what happened to the Soviet Union, right? It became a mockery. And there's in the second Batman movie, Nolan's Batman movie, I think Dark Knight Rises, I can't remember the sequencing of them, right? And there's a scene in there where the Scarecrow, the insane therapist, is a judge. And he's just issuing fatwas from the bench. And the whole thing is a mockery of the weakness and hollowness of words without force of the people behind them.
So again, I agree with what you've just said there, right? You need to enforce the Constitution. The Constitution, in my opinion, is God's law, of a Christian nation. But most importantly, if you read the Bill of Rights, if you actually, and I've spoken to many judges and none of them have even read it, it's fundamental law. Right? So when you read that, it tells you that the judges, not just the king, not just the king's councillors, not just the privy council, the judges were crooked.
Yes.
they were ideologically driven, and that is not the way justice should work.
Well, this is what Alfred did, right? This is what started the English common law. Alfred went after the judges because they were even speaking English, speaking languages, Latin and other languages that the people couldn't understand, and they were just ruling for their own favor, right? They were lords from the bench without the titles, right? But what's happening now is they're mocking you. What they are doing is demonstrating how empty the rule of law is if the people won't go to violence to ensure that the rule of law is maintained.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So you have an option there in the United Kingdom that does it. And, oh, by the way, that impacts the Commonwealth too, other Commonwealth nations. Occupy the crown. That is the high ground. That is the font from which all rule of law flows.
Okay.
For the people, right? The people are not the law. The crown is the law. The people are who the law is for.
King in council is the
King
law.
in council.
King in council created the Magna Carta,
Correct.
Charter of Liberties, created the Charter of the Forest. King in council.
Correct.
And crucially important. One other person speaks about this who has left England, now resides in, I believe, Tennessee, and his name is Douglas Castle, who used to be a member of Parliament in this country. And he has actually tweeted, "You can reverse all this by King in council."
And quickly.
Yeah, and quickly. People don't realise it. We can change things
quickly.
Like
because you can, we talked this last time, you can invalidate everything from 1688 on, maybe early 1700s. You can invalidate it because virtually all of it was done unconstitutionally and illegally.
Correct.
And most of it was done by fiat, right? So you can undo it with the law. You don't have to sit there and rewrite, the laws, and you don't have to reset the structure. You have after 1,000 years, 1,200 years, got absolutely every argument, every code, every line of text you need, every precedent that's been adjudicated many times and held. All you got to do is occupy the crown, and you don't have to do it through violence. Now, what you do have to do, though, is you do have to be willing to use violence that would try to take the crown back from the people. Because that is what they will do.
It was Cromwell that reminted the crown, so melted down the crown and imprinted, and today, the crown that was used in the coronation, and it says, property of the Commonwealth.
Correct.
That's what it says. So people need to understand that we hold that crown. It is ours.
Correct.
They're there because we want them there, not because they have to be there. And then when you actually start to present this, let me just go back to what you said there, because it is important. So people need to understand that the Acts of Union started off as a treaty, right? And a treaty meaning international law, meaning between Scotland and England, right? Any international, and I've listened to another interview where you was on with Neil Oliver, and there was a gentleman there saying that, once a country has ratified international law, it becomes domestic law. It does not, right?
No, it does not.
It has to be passed by the Parliament, all right? And I'll give you an indication of that.
Graham, on that, I think the Terrorism Act and the International Criminal Act were passed by Parliament.
So it has to be. Well, so some of them laws have not been passed. Some have, some haven't.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, if you talk about ratification just means that the government and the Crown agree, but it still needs to go through the process of Parliament and become domestic law to become law in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Right. If it doesn't go through that process, ratification does not. It can. So the law courts will say, we can be minded to it. We can take that into consideration, but it is not law, right?
Yes.
It only becomes law when it's that process. And I'll give you an example. The United Nations, so there's two examples, and it's just to make it clear to people, because even me 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, used to think that ratification meant it's law, and it doesn't, right? It must be made into law by a domestic parliament. And what that means is, when the Acts of Union, which is started off as a treaty to protect both constitutions, by the way, and protect the entirety of the people, as a treaty, not as a law, for it to become law, so in other words, an enactment to protect our constitutions, they had to put through both parliaments the acts in plural, Acts of Union, right? And that created a central parliament, which, by the way, is communist in nature because it centralizes, and you shouldn't have that.
Actually, all government is socialist, regardless of what form it is. But,
to give you another example of that, the United Nations Convention Against Torture, UNCAT it's called, that was ratified in 1984 by the British government. It was enacted through Parliament in 1988 on the tricentenary of the English Bill of Rights, and it was literally the Criminal Justice Act 1988, Section 134, torture. And when you look that up, rape and torture gangs, for example, and acquiescence, consent, act, what was the other one? There was another important one there as well. There's four elements to it. Individually, any one of them, for example, acquiescence. If a judge, if an MP, if a chief constable, if a police constable, if someone in social services, in the council, if councillors, if any of them people did anything to allow the rape and torture gangs to continue, they can be tried in front of a jury, and Section 6 states it's a mandatory life sentence. There is no discretion from the judge, right? Why am I mentioning this? Because that come from a treaty and the United Nations, but it did not become domestic law until it was put through Parliament in that act, the Criminal Justice Act 1998, Section 134, torture. So once people understand there is a double process, and if it's ratified, it doesn't mean it's law.
Understood.
Even if it's, and again, something else is really important. There's something called cogents, which is international common law, right? International common law is what I also argue, right, in our High Court to say this is international common law. It has set precedent. We accepted that. So why is that important? It's because once it has become ratified and then becomes domestic law, your parliament is then saying they will abide by that international law. That's it. And that's why it's important when you look at the things that you was talking about, reference with, and I agree entirely. In fact, I've got a whole book here that tells me about the Terrorism Act, and you are not allowed to finance it in any way. Right? And if you do, even via your taxes, you are committing a criminal offence. And you have the right. Every Englishman is a common lawyer, and every Englishman has the right to say, I do not. In fact, every Englishman has the right to arrest someone on the spot. If they witness a crime, they must step in. If there's no police constables about, they must step in and arrest it. It's called a citizen. It exists in America, and it exists in England. Let me just make sure that for some reason that mic just changed.
Yeah, and Graham, you've frozen. I want to go back, Graham, to the reclamation that the United States is going to reclaim England and liberate England from these authoritarians that are destroying our lives and our liberty. And ask you, isn't this just fanciful thinking, Ian, on your part? It'd be great.
We cannot run the risk of the British system and regime falling into enemy hands. That destabilizes the entire world.
Okay, say more about that.
The British occupier regime has been behind most of the terrorism, most of the wars, etc., for the last 200 plus years, 300 years. It was the largest land or the largest empire in the history of the world for hundreds of years. It's got power and influence and connections everywhere in the world. It's been bringing about color revolutions for centuries. If we allow the United Kingdom to fall, the Commonwealth to fall, the world is destabilized. There is no check on the soft power manipulative control that it will continue to use the devil's legions and its offshore spider's web wealth to destabilize the world, because that's how it thrives. That's how it funds itself. That's how this shadow empire, the British Empire, occupies peoples all over the world. So we can't let it fall.
Okay, I understand, Naeem. So I think what you're saying is, so one is I believe that Donald Trump is out to get the US independent of the City of London, get it out from under the heel of the City of London. So
he represents a body of people that have been working on that for years.
Sovereigntists who don't want to be ruled over by the remnants of the British Empire.
Well, by the British, yeah.
By the British, right?
Yeah.
And really through the City of London and its proxies. So he wants to wrestle the United States free from that hold. But in order for the United States to prevail, it's not enough to wrestle free. They have to destroy that enemy. Otherwise, it'll reemerge.
And we're doing that all over the world. That's what we're doing in the Middle East. That's what we're doing in Ukraine, quite literally. Now we're doing it in Southeast Asia. The last bastion of real threat, and again, sorry, Rich, is India, Pakistan.
Sure. No, I completely get it. I want to ask Graham about, because you got me thinking about Venezuela. And you and I have done a couple of videos with Blaine, and you've talked about it on other shows that we've done and with others and stuff about Venezuela. But Graham, your take on what's happening in Venezuela?
So there's a number of things going on. I mean, there are elements that I won't be able to talk about on this video that I believe is going on in Venezuela. But there are massive issues. So these people, don't forget, if you think about China, I think China will. I have a different opinion of President Xi to most people. Right?
He's a solid guy.
He is his father's son, and if you knew what they did to his father, which was locked him up because he wanted this. what he has created in China is the next level of an economy. That's why there's a big difference between China and the way it operates. You go and look at their cities, their infrastructure, etc.
Yeah.
They are doing things in a quasi-capitalist way, right? They're not.
They're doing it in the original American way before we went communist in the last century. You know, fascist, Nazi, whatever.
So there are lots, so Venezuela is crucially important. There are things that are happening. If I went, and it's not just about Venezuela, by the way, it's also about Colombia. It's also
Argentina.
Where was the other one? Not Uruguay. There's another one.
El Salvador, Nicaragua, Panama.
No, there's another. Well, Panama's important.
Paraguay is another heavy crime conduit. That's where Hezbollah is embedded.
It used to be a British colony,
Guyana,
right? And David Lammy, his parents come from Guyana. Someone else called Gina Miller, right? Everyone should remember her from Article 15, brought a big case. Her father was the Attorney General, right, in that country, and was a communist, right? So all of that is about what we're seeing now and going on. And Uruguay and Venezuela and a couple of countries, they need to stop what's going on there. And a lot of this relates back to the Holy Roman Empire and the Jesuits, right? And another group of people called the Frankists. And once you get involved with that and start realizing who these people are in the back, and it goes back to the Holy Roman Empire, not the Holy Roman See, it gets very deep. And I think that the people currently in the United States of America are dealing with all of that at the same time.
Graham, I actually created.
Hold on a second, right? Graham, he's clean, well presented, you know, just a regular sort of English guy. But then we go inside his brain, and it's like whole catacombs of knowledge that lead off in all sorts of different directions. Those books aren't behind your shelf; they're in your being, Graham. That's what it's like talking to you.
So, Graham, we're getting ready to launch a thing, a world building thing that ties back into all this. And I've been writing the novel that goes back over the last 800 years of history, but how that's all playing out today. But I created a banner at the center of it, and it's very much what you're talking about. It's our who our enemies really are. And in the center of that banner is the Fabian Society.
Yeah.
And it says unity is our strength. Well, unity means you subjugate yourself to us, and our means us, and strength means we have power over you, right? So it's a play on the words. On the left side are banners, flags of Rome, the Holy Roman Empire, etc. And on the right are different organizations at different times from, the ancient past to today, elements that are still extant. We are still fighting Rome. We never stopped fighting Rome.
I agree.
Right? Von Clausewitz, 2.5 centuries ago, or wherever it was, von Clausewitz stated, wars never end. They just change phase in nature.
Yep. Politics is an extension of war.
Well, what are we at war with constantly? It's it's the first doctrinal line in the book I wrote, The Eternal War, power. There is an eternal conflict over the concept of power. Does power belong to a small number of people who exercise it over others, or does power belong to the people, right? To these responsible, individually sovereign peoples. And that's an eternal fight. Well, Rome believes in a small number of people with total absolute power. The English peoples, the Germanic, Northwest Germanic and English-speaking peoples, we have a fundamental different perspective and concept on that. We believe that the people have the power. Now, you got to be responsible, right? You can't just be a person. You have to be individually responsible, very much back to the law thing, right? An Englishman doesn't just have a right, he has an obligation.
Correct.
And if you don't honor the obligation, you're not an Englishman.
Exactly right. And that's the bit, I won't go into detail, but there's something else I'm dealing with at the moment, which exactly is the point of that. But let me get back. So I agree with you entirely. We've never stopped fighting the Romans.
No.
And prior to that as well.
And that's what the EU is, by the way, right? That's what EU is. That's what NATO is. That's what all of this is. It's Rome.
It's why Putin has said on 3 different occasions, we are not part of your Roman Empire.
Correct.
Right? Leave us alone, right? That you can't make it any clearer. But let me just make sure, because we spoke about Venezuela. President Trump has now declared, right, and I take my hat off to him, right? Everyone talks about this war on drugs. I don't like drugs, by the way, right? This war on drugs, this war on drugs, this war on drugs, right? President Trump has just declared that fentanyl is a weapon of mass destruction. What a great man, right? It kills 100,000 people a year in the United States of America. It is smuggled into your nation, right? And the Canada way of telling the people manufacturing this, if you are caught or will know you're doing that, it is a weapon of mass destruction, and we have the right to nuke you. Do you understand? Right? And then all of a sudden it will stop. There was a discussion between President Xi and President Trump on his first term, and he made a speech after it. And he said, saying, I agree with China that if you get caught drug dealing or drugs possession or drugs this or drugs that, you should receive the death penalty, right?
Above the door of Planet Hollywood in Beijing, in big letters, it says, no nukes and drugs allowed. I spent years in China, working in China, and as a Burlingame, the family goes back in China to the 1860s. My fundamental belief is that ARC has already happened. America, Russia, China has already happened, and we are already doing intelligence sharing. And what is the intelligence sharing specifically oriented to? We are ripping out the Roman occupation of the English-speaking peoples. And that's all over the world. And that does include Venezuela, it does include Guyana, it does include Colombia, it does include other parts of South and Central America. But it's also in the Middle East, heavily, right? It's in South and Southeast Asia. Everywhere that the British Empire was, we have to root this out, right? Rip it out, root and stem.
Absolutely. I agree entirely. There are so many positives that President Trump is doing currently, even making a declaration, an executive order, that if anyone attacks Qatar again, anyone attacks them again, that President Trump and the United States will take that as an attack on the United States of America.
We're going to do the same with with Venezuela, because Venezuela is the Qatar in our hemisphere.
Yeah.
It's been the headquarters for the Devil's Legions, and they've been self-funding through oil and drugs, etc. But what it really is that is the British headquarters for all their destabilization operations around South and Central America, and even here in the United States. It's not Mexico. It's Venezuela.
I agree.
Okay, guys, we need to finish up because I have a hard stop today, right?
Oh, and I have to go to the bathroom.
You go to the bathroom. we will do this again in a few weeks' time. There's a couple of things I want to say. It's absolutely fascinating listening to you both, and how the conversation goes is one of the M's says this, and then the other M says that, and then the other M says that, and the other M says that, and it sort of builds like fabulously complimentary. And Graham, you are just an incredible mine of information. I'm blown away by your recall, and I'm going to have the links to Graham in the description below. So please go and check him out on Rumble and support his work. And Ian, great writer, love having you on. Thank you so much. Look forward to having you on again. And everybody, please share, subscribe, all that business, and we shall speak again soon. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Bye.